Ha! Blood! Violence! Gore! Freedom of choice. And politically incorrect humor?
Holy shit! We reclaim this holy land in the name of Allah!
Is it just me, or has games these days become somewhat soft? Where a lot of games used to have thought-provoking dialogue and stories, everything now feels so sanitized and safe. And so many wants to be family friendly even if the game is aimed at or rated for mature audiences. In the past, games didn't really care if they offended you. If anything, that was sometimes the whole point. And that made for some truly unique experiences that I personally miss. We're in a weird era of gaming where almost every franchise I grew up with has either been cancelled or drastically dumbed down to appeal to a wider audience. And in many cases, this includes remakes of older games, rewritten and altered slightly or just enough so as to not offend a specific demographic. At the same time, we are seeing some fantastic new releases, especially from the East, and the world of indie games have never been stronger. Alright, then I'm gonna split this into two parts, where I first talk about the general softification, is that a word? Well, it is now, of AAA games, because yes, I am mostly focusing on AAA games. And then later I'd like to delve into why I personally believe it has evolved this way.
Hector says buenas noches.
Saints Row released on Xbox 360 in 2006 and was an open world game set in the fictional city of Stillwater. It focused on gang warfare, and your mission is to take control of the city from rival gangs. Because of similarities to GTA, it quickly got labeled as a GTA clone, but I remember actually preferring Saints Row since there was more you could actually do in the world, especially in the second one. It did well financially, selling over 1 million copies by the end of the year. Saints Row 2 came 2 years later in 2008 and expanded on pretty much everything. And while the first game had a more serious tone, the second one started shifting more towards the over-the-top, absurd humor the franchise became known for. But it was still pretty gritty at times and actually had a surprisingly deep and emotional story. This is my personal favorite in the franchise by far. 2 more games followed up in 2011 and 2013, but by this point I wasn't really interested anymore. They left the more grounded feeling of the first 2 games and went all out on the absurdity, and I don't know, it just became too goofy for me. Some people seem to like it though, so good for them. But then they decided to reboot the series in 2022. Most likely because Saints Row 4 went so far off the rails that they figured starting fresh with a new cast, setting and storyline was the only way to go. Which does make some sense, but it was absolute trash. Where Saints Row 2 blended serious crime drama with chaotic, fun gameplay and memorable characters, the reboot toned down everything that made the series fun, in favor of bland millennial writing, cringy dialogue, and trying to appeal to the mythical modern audience. It feels like it was written by the unpopular kid in high school that never had any friends and tried way too hard to be liked. The game was also full of bugs, and due to the game's reception, a year later, Volition Studios closed its doors for good, taking their franchise with it. Watch Dogs is another example where the first game had a more serious tone. It had a revenge-driven story with a darker atmosphere and focused on personal loss and the ethical implications of surveillance. I actually really liked this game, and the whole downgrade controversy aside, it's sad to see this and be reminded of how far Ubisoft has fallen. Watch Dogs 2 came out in 2016, so we're already pretty far into the soft modern era. Instead of playing as an anonymous middle-aged dude out for revenge, you're now blessed with a bunch of colorful hipsters in the very colorful city of San Francisco. Reminds me of something. The game has an overall lighter tone and is focusing on freedom, social justice and, big corpo bad. Now the gameplay aspect of the game is actually way better than the first, so I still dream of a world where they released a version of the first game with all the gameplay improvements and mechanics of the second. Oh well, we know that would never happen because the next game in the series was Watch Dogs Legion. I don't really have anything to say about this one since I never cared to try it out. The whole play as anyone gimmick and overall feel of the game didn't appeal to me. But safe to say, it's another example of a franchise that lost its way. Then again, a lot of people point to the second game as a high note in the series. For me, the more serious tone and grounded gameplay of the first game will forever be the one I choose. Alright, this is making me depressed, I just speed through a few more. Call of Duty, once gritty and dark, aiming to be historically accurate and immerse players in the horrors of war. Now just a shadow of its former self. Mass Effect, one of my favorite games ever made, slapped the Mass Effect name on the mess that was Andromeda. A buggy disaster with robotic characters and lazy writing.
To whom? And your goddamn father. Sorry, my face is tired, my face is tired, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
Dragon Age series went from looking like this to whatever this is trying to be. What is it with all these new games in purple? Is there some secret hidden psychological trigger in the color purple I'm not aware of? I also miss the old school, quote, badass type games with politically incorrect humor and over-the-top violence like the old Duke Nukem, Carmageddon and Postal 2, etc. I guess it's just a thing of the past, since I know they tried with Postal 4, then it didn't really stick, for me at least. Now, I know there are still modern games that are absolute badass. Space Marine 2, the upcoming Gears of War E-Day, Doom the Dark Ages. I mean, Doom has always been badass. And we've had other types of amazing games recently, like Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring, Cyberpunk, Black Myth Wukong, Dustborn. I love that when I type Dustborn, it autocorrects to Dustbin. Alright, so here's the thing. I could go on and on showing examples of franchises that went from something great to just ending up as general slop. If you try to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. And you lose that core audience you cater to and built up from the beginning. Back in the early to mid 2000s, gaming had exploded with the success of consoles like the PS2 and Xbox 360, and it was becoming more mainstream than ever. But developers were still very much experimenting with games, and while some studios and publishers tried to expand to a wider audience, others had found theirs and focused on delivering the best experience they could to them. This led to some fantastic games like Mass Effect and GTA, the early Call of Duties, Metal Gear Solid, and so many more. With the rise of a little thing called social media and YouTube, people from all over the world suddenly had a voice, and this has significantly impacted the way developers used to make games. Social media has given a platform to a much larger and more diverse gaming community, allowing voices from different demographics, cultures, and perspectives to be heard more clearly than ever before. As a result, game studios have shifted their focus to creating content that resonates with this wide-ranging audience. This shift often involves toning down edgy or controversial content that could alienate or offend certain groups, and instead producing games that feel safer and more universally acceptable. There's also a whole conversation to be had about the push for DEI and forced political messaging that's happening in a lot of games recently, but that's a topic for another video perhaps. Additionally, games today are often designed with global markets in mind. Studios take extra care to avoid offending cultural sensibilities, making games more acceptable for international audiences.
Now we have the opportunity to tell a new Indiana Jones story for a modern gaming audience.
This can lead to the removal or alteration of content that might be deemed inappropriate or controversial in certain regions. We see this a lot in remakes and remasters, for example. Political correctness becomes a major consideration, and humor, characters, or storylines that might have thrived in the more freewheeling environment of the early 2000s games are often reworked or removed entirely to avoid backlash. On top of this, content creators and streamers have a massive sway over gaming trends, leading developers to cater to what's popular or what these personalities promote, rather than focusing on riskier, more unique ideas. I'm curious to see where we go from here though, as we are starting to see a major shift in, I guess, the tolerance of what we the customers actually want, as evident by recent failures like Concord, Dustborn, and Star Wars Outlaws.
It's called Star Wars Outlaw, and the only people you can steal from are the police.
I think that's a good point to end on, and there's a lot more I want to talk about in more detail, but I'll save that for other videos since I first need to watch some tutorials on how to edit before I can upload this. So thank you for watching, and if you found this interesting at all, please consider subscribing and leave a like or a dislike. And since this is my first video ever, I'm curious to see if you have any suggestions on topics or whatever else it might be. Just leave a comment down there. Alright, Snackes. Oh shit, I need my phone back.